You're listening to Dairy Voice by Dairy Business News, a podcast exclusively for the dairy industry.
One of our sponsors of the Dairy Voice podcast is National DHIA. NDHIA ensures information accuracy and represents their members' interests. They are the direct voice for the dairy information industry. To find out more, go to dhia.org.
Dairy One's Soil Laboratory provides a variety of industries with soil testing and analysis. For most of our customers, their businesses literally start from the ground up. A soil analysis will help our customers ensure that the right nutrients are available in the soil or if additional fertilizers are needed. These decisions will impact their plant growth and yield. If you need to improve your soil's health, Dairy One is ready to help. Contact the Dairy One Soil Laboratory by emailing soil@dairyone.com. That's dairyone.com.
Welcome to this edition of the Dairy Voice, sponsored by Showbox Sires. And our topic that we're going to work on all year is the evolution of the great cow. To me, in my 30 plus years in this business, there's three pillars to success in owning and breeding great cattle of any breed. The pillars to success that I feel are out there are genetics, management and care, and marketing. If you own great cattle of any breed and you can put those three ingredients into your program, it is the formula, I think, for success. So as we work on this podcast series, we want to interview iconic people from around the world, had played roles in each of these areas: genetics, marketing, care and management of cattle, and just the overall stewardship of the dairy business. And it is a true pleasure for me today to introduce one of my true friends from around the world, a guy I met 2.5 decades ago, I believe, in Australia. Brian, as I introduce you, I'm going to complain a little bit. I'm a huge Australian Open tennis fan, and my sleep pattern is a disaster right now because I'm staying up till the wee hours of the night and morning to watch the tennis from Melbourne. But it's looks like you've had great weather for tennis. But anyway, it's my distinct pleasure to introduce one of the great cowmen I know anywhere in the world, Brian Leslie. So Brian, welcome to our series.
Thanks for having me, Tim.
So Brian, I think the name is quite recognizable around the world. Tell us a little bit about where Brian Leslie came from in your career and how you got going in this business and what a few of the things that you've done.
Oh, blade if I know. I was born and raised on a dairy farm that had registered Holsteins and a few registered Jerseys. And when I was quite young, the neighbour was a bachelor guy that had really good Jersey cows. And although we had Holsteins, I got really interested in Jerseys. I wasn't good at school. And my dad said to me, "You're going to have to learn to read better." And he threw me a Livestock Bulletin magazine, and I read that, and I liked to read about cows, and that was at a young time, and so I got interested in reading pedigrees, and I guess it all went from there. I got keen on pedigree cattle and pedigrees from all over the world, and I wanted to be an auctioneer and started doing that when I was 15, and I just guess it evolved from there. I got connected with the right people, I guess, and was lucky enough to have my job be the thing that I love to do, and it took me all over the world. I'd been practicing for a while, but I started work at the age of 15, and we used to have just a local stockyard, I guess you'd call it, over there, and we had a calf market, which was, week-old calves, and the auctioneer didn't turn up, and I remember ringing from the phone at the sale yards, ringing the boss, and I said, "Where is he?" He said, "He's not coming." I said, "Who's going to sell him?" He said, "You are," and he hung the phone up. So I started selling from then on.
That's fantastic. Do you have any idea, Brian, how many cows you've sold over the years or how many sales you've cried?
No, I don't know. I mean, it's a hell of a lot, and we do a lot of big sales, and a lot of the sales I do these days are 300, 400, 500 head, or 300 to 400 head, and they take in the ballpark of 5 hours to sell, and I sell the whole lot, so it goes on. So I suppose the amount of hours I've sold is a lot.
Well, and I would tell our listeners, if you ever get the chance to listen to a Brian Leslie sale, it's worth it. And Brian, a true compliment. I have sat in the box with the greatest, I think. I've sat beside, the Hardy Shores of the world and the Dave Ramas and the Chris Hills and the Tom Morrises And then one of my idols, certainly Merlin Woodruff, Johnny Copperthorne, just great auctioneers. But I've never sat in the box with anybody I had any more enjoyment with than you, because not only, Brian, are you a great auctioneer, you have a great pace and a great energy, but you know the pedigrees. So that there's times when you and I clash because I'm the pedigree reader and you're the auctioneer. But once we got that straightened out, Leslie, we've flown pretty well, haven't we?
We did. Yeah, here we don't have a pedigree reader except if the likes of you or Roger Turner comes down. We might make you try and look good, but I do the whole lot because we don't have time, I suppose. But you talk about those great auctioneers. I was lucky when I was young to go over to North America and, got to know and become lifelong friends with Brent Walker and, the amount I've learned off him. And I watched, and I'll never forget, and I always think about watching Bob Shaw and Bill Kent sell at those great sales in Canada that I went to in the 80s and 90s. And, to be at Hanover Hill and see Bob Shaw and Bill Kent in action, I'll remember that forever. They were just unbelievable and inspired me a heck of a lot.
Transform dairy data from numbers into valuable decision-making information with Herd HQ, the ultimate web-based platform brought to you by DRMS. Leverage advanced analytics, benchmarking, and alert systems to optimize productivity, minimize costs, and improve herd health. If you're part of the Beef on Dairy movement, check out Keeper Beef. Love your iPhone or iPad? CowCompass will provide you with extensive animal and herd information, no matter what type of device you use. Do you like charts and graphs? Check out Dairy Depot, with over 100 charts and tables. Herd HQ is available to all herds that process their DHI data with DRMS. Don't miss out on this game-changing dairy management solution. Contact DRMS today to schedule a demo.
Well, that leads me to my next area of questions. You mentioned your good friendship with some of the guys in Canada and around the world. Give me a few of the who's who of who Brian Leslie's mentors are.
Brent Walker, I got to meet and stay with, when I first went to Canada in 1985, and we were similar age and similar kind of people, I guess. And, he's been a wonderful mentor to me over the years. I was lucky enough, though, when I was very young to meet Darryl Brown here in Australia. And I was 12 when I met Darryl, and he was the leading, what we call in Australia, stud stock auctioneer. And he said to me when he met me, "What do you want to do when you leave school?" And I said, "I want your job." And lucky enough, I worked for the same company as Darryl, and then I worked under Darryl. He was the manager and I was the auctioneer, and then we started our own business. And he was an enormous inspiration to me, and he was the one that pointed me in the right direction. He was the one that advised me to go to North America in the 80s, and we've been business partners for several decades, and he's now retired, but he's still a great mentor. And another guy that I think has been a tremendous mentor to me is here in this country, I regard as the greatest breeder of dairy cattle. Frank Sorrigan had the Rockwood Park herd. We bought some farms off him, and so we were neighbours. And, he taught so much about breeding cows and marketing cows and life in general. And, of course, my parents, they're still great supporters, and Dad's been a great supporter all the way through.
Well, you had a whale of a herd of cows there at your home farm, Brian, that you were involved with your dad and I believe your brother with for years. I think maybe you're not milking cows anymore. Is that right? But your pedigrees would live on.
Yeah, well, we did. We bred Holsteins, and we got up to milking 600 cows. And Keith, my brother, was the cow man, and then my other brother, Dean, is the cropping man. And I guess I was the pedigree man and the marketer, and Dad and Mum were great supporters. And I milked all the time when if I didn't have a sale, but they were the nuts and bolts. So we stopped milking in 2017 and dispersed the cows over a few years and heifers, and we now just do crop and beef. But I guess you're still like pedigrees, and we have beef cattle, although we don't have registered ones. We breed Hereford cattle, and we use great pedigree bulls. It's in you. That's what you do, and it works.
That's right. And it doesn't matter what you're breeding, beef cattle, dairy cows, pedigrees still matter. Brian, you've traveled the world. I referenced that at the start of this interview. Tell me a little bit about some of the populations of cattle that you've visited and what you've seen around the world and in your many trips globally.
Well, I guess I went to, both Canada and America from 1985 right through until 2008 every year. So it's 20-something plus years that I looked at cattle in all over North America. And, I'll never forget going to those wonderful herds of cows, Roybrook and Hanover Hill and Romandale and Skagvale and Pinehurst, in the old days. And they didn't have the gear that we have today to breed great cows, but they're incredible cow people. And to see those herds and Carnation, I was lucky to go there when I remember the milking full sisters to Councillor. I think there was 7 or 8 of them, all by Valiant, given an enormous amount of milk that we hadn't seen in that era. They were tremendous times. But I think on Jersey Island, I've been there a few times and judged there once. And John Lefevre will be, in my mind, as one of the great cowmen and great breeders that I've ever come across. But I've seen wonderful cows all over the world, and certainly some tremendous breeding operations in New Zealand too. It's not far away from here, but it's another country, and seen some marvellous herds and sold some marvellous sales there. But good cows are where you find them, aren't they? And it's a global deal these days, and it has been now for a fair while. And, we keep seeing the great cow families all over the world, really. And we've been lucky enough with the advent of importing embryos to bring all those not all, but a heap of those great families in from North America to here, and they become household names here too.
Well, and that's what's critical, Brian, I think, with what we're doing at Showbox and my career in this business. It's become a global business, and our genetics all cross. They cross the water, they cross the boundaries, they get through trade barriers, and we help breeders make more profit with their cattle, however you want to do that. And Brian, you've been instrumental in that. You kind of walked down a road that I want to travel on this interview with you. You've become a global icon with marketing cattle, and I talked about 3 pillars, and we've talked a little about genetics and breeding cattle. But I think one of the great legacies Brian Leslie will leave us with in this business is your vision to market cattle. And I think if we talk about the pillars, marketing cattle and promoting cattle is critical. I want to explore 2 areas. One is you have been a great proponent of herd sales. I've heard you give the speech more than once, Brian, about your view of how people need to sell their cattle and what kind of cattle they should sell to represent their herd. Tell me a little about your past experience with herd sales and how important they are to the evolution of the great cow and the great breeder.
We don't just sell pedigree cattle, we sell commercial cattle, lots of them. And while we sell a lot of herds and cows privately without going to auction, I think the greatest way to get the most for them is to put them to auction, and be them commercial or be them pedigree. I think these days you've got to get pictures of the cows, and by that I mean paddock pictures. I mean, our buyers like to see paddock pictures of cows, how they are out in the paddock. That really works for us. And I guess COVID was a terrible thing, but one thing it did was teach us other ways. And we then took on online auctions, the same physical auction, just like you do with Cow Buyer. We have the same thing here called Elite or Stock Live, which is exactly the same platform. And when the time with COVID come in, we had lots of cows to sell, and it didn't stop our business. And it was scary as an auctioneer. I had a lot of sales where I had nobody at the sale, nobody, full stop. And to look at nobody is not a very nice feeling for an auctioneer. But I've got used to it. And even now, when COVID's not on, our buyers have got that used to bidding online. They'll ring me or text me or our agents and say, tell me which ones not to bid on. And I think that's important on our point, that we do tell them that. And they bid online. You probably won't believe me, but I did a lot of sales this past 12 months where I didn't have any more than 10 or 15 people at the sale, full stop. Yet we had successful sales because we had all that online. So I think getting good photos of cows out in the paddock is really important for us. And an honest description of them is important. But like we said earlier, before this was going to air, we used to have everything in print. I'm still old-fashioned. I like things in print. So our catalogues are still in print, but everyone looks online. So we use as good of pictures and as good of videos. And I like to do a bit of a story about them and tell them about the cattle and get people interacted. So that's the kind of thing we work through.
Stuff. And I think very valuable to our listeners. If you were to give advice to a breeder on how to select a group of cattle to sell in their own sale, Brian, what would you tell them? I mean, you've made some great points about pictures, honesty, integrity. How do they pick what cattle they sell?
Well, I always say put the cows in the sale that you'd be happy to buy yourself, and keep the cows out that you wouldn't. And I mean, I had a lady ring me yesterday, actually, and a lady I really don't know, and they milk toward 1,000 cows, and they're thinking of getting out, and she asked me what to do. And I said, well, for a start, you've probably got 5 to 10% of your herd that won't be marketable, and they've got to go out of the picture straight away. And let's be honest, we all have them. We have older cows, or we have light-corded cows, or people aren't going to want them. Cows that have been in milk too long, they're not going to want them. So I think really put the cows in or the heifers in that you'd be happy to buy yourself is the best advice I could give.
And I've heard you say that more than one breeder, Brian. And one of the greatest sales I've ever been involved was with the Bush Lee anniversary sale for Keith and Pat Kuhn and family there in Australia. I still say one of the great breeding establishments for jerseys ever. And I remember you talking to them and talking through what they were selling. I mean, that sales series has been tremendous in the success ranks, right?
Absolutely. That sale, I think every animal in the sale was sired by Lester at the time. Every single one of them was by him. And of course, they had their cow family, the Fernleafs, which still are a magnificent maternal line here in Australia. And you were one of the smart guys that got some embryos and took them to North America and had some fun with them too. And we still see that family going well all over the world. And the Kewins at Bush Lee had an annual sale for I don't know how many years, somewhere near 30. And you can't have a sale for that long as one vendor if your article's not going and doing the job for other people. And, it brings me to another great marketer and a visionary and a guy that was an incredible mentor to me was Reg Broad of the Frankliff jerseys. He held more than 60 sales on farm of his own. And, I was lucky enough to sell probably the last 15 of them. He didn't have all the luxuries that we have today as far as internet and online, and how he would present his cattle and how they would present their cattle and was nothing short of brilliant. And they focused on telling people what their animals had done. And I'm a big believer in that. We've got another guy here, Murray Souter, that runs the Murray Brook Holsteins, and he's imported cattle live from Canada. And I'm just finishing his catalogue now for his final dispersal. The Murray Brook cattle have gone away and done so well for people that it's relatively easy to continue to market them because they've got a great track record.
No, that's right. And, I think as we think about the connections around the world, if you ask me, you mentioned Reg Broad. If you ask me who 3 of my favorite people in the business to ever talk to, Reg Broad, I would sit down and listen to Reg Broad talk about cattle breeding. I'd sit down and talk to Peter English about Holstein history. I'd sit down and talk with Horace Backus. Those are all guys that have absolutely changed the course, all of them ahead of their time, and all of them great visionaries with promotion and development of cattle. And the other guy in Australia and you mentioned Murray Souter, we talked about the Kewins, but one of my favorite breeders in Australia certainly is Johnny Gardner from Avonlea. Johnny's done some great things, and I think kind of a global icon. And you've been very involved with John's operation.
We're great friends, and we talk to one another a couple of times a week all the time. And he's out of milking now, but we did his 3 dispersals over 3 years and sold nearly 300 cattle for near a $10,000 average over the whole lot. And in our country, that's a lot. But John was always one that wanted to bring in a new cow family or a new cow if he thought she would add something to his program, or buy embryos from the great cows, and never stopped. The greatest judge of cows that I've ever come across is my brother, although he's never judged a show and never would. And we'd stop there and he said, I'll go with you and have a look through John's herd before we dispersed it. And we went on a weekend and walked through the cows, just the 3 of us. And I can still hear Keith standing in the paddock saying, well, this is the greatest herd of cows I've ever seen. And it was unbelievable because what he'd done, he did cull out the ones that weren't right. And it was like going to a big show to see a herd of cows. Every one of them could go. And I mean, every one of them could have gone to a big show, and it was an incredible herd. And they're still doing things from where you got Premier Breeder last week at IDW and didn't show a cow himself. So that's a pretty good indication they've gone away and done great things for people, isn't it?
No, it truly is. And one of the the reason I bring up John Gardner, because Brian, I think you would absolutely agree that honesty, integrity, and consistency are 3 factors in this business that you can't overstate their value. And a guy like Johnny Gardner or Keith and Pat Kuhn that have put their reputation on the line to do it right every day. I guess if you and I were to talk to somebody about how you get going in this, integrity, honesty, they're critical, aren't they?
It's pretty easy to tell the truth because it's hard to forget the lies, and those guys, they just do it because it's easy for them and it works.
So to switch gears, you just mentioned Avonlea being premier breeder at International Dairy Week. I want to walk through the history of International Dairy Week. I think, Brian, I've been 6 or 7 times. I wish I'd been 20 times. And I'm hoping to have a return trip there next year to see all my great Australian and New Zealand friends and obviously friends from around the world. Tell us, our listeners, Brian, about International Dairy Week. And I will preface this with basically International Dairy Week was the vision of Brian Leslie. And he, with partner David Blackmore, put together a plan to develop a show modeled after the Royal or modeled after Expo, bring the world to Australia. And Brian, I think that's a fair lead in to what's happened at Dairy Week. Tell us the history of International Dairy Week, what it was, what it is.
Well, I guess it goes back. Yeah, Darryl Brown was my business partner, and he was such an entrepreneurial kind of a guy. And he wanted to have a convention in Australia and bring great speakers from around the world to Australia to share their knowledge with our dairy industry. Shepparton was the place to have it because at the time it was the headquarters of the Australian dairy industry. There was more cows getting milked in northern Victoria than anywhere else in the world. And he wanted to do that. And I said, well, if you're going to do that, why don't we have a cow show as well? And he said, well, if we're going to have a cow show, you run the cow show and I'll run the convention. So that's basically what happened. We put together a cow show. We brought Lauren Alsace down to judge from Quiet Cove. He was the gun judge in the US at the time. And plus he bred a bull that was really popular here in Australia that was imported live. So he was our judge. Cattle came from most states of Australia. I'm pretty sure we had them from every state. And, that's a pretty big deal for this country to do it. Anyway, we had it in 1990. It was judged under the gum tree at Tatura in January, which is our summer, which is school holidays, so kids could take part. And we wanted to have a youth show. We didn't have 4-H, or don't have 4-H like you do over there. So we had a youth show as well of all breeds. The cow show was just a Holstein show. Anyhow, cut a long story short, it went off great. We had a big sale in the Civic Centre on stage, and it was tremendous success and broke a lot of records. And we thought it went that well, we'd have another one in 3 years' time. By then, Darryl had retired from the business, and I was on my own. And I said, well, we'll give it one crack. So we did that. And that was in 93. And then I had that much pressure put on from the breeders around the country to do it every year, that we did it every year. That's when David Blackmore come on board. And he was the nuts and bolts of getting it to happen. I was the front man, I suppose. And as time went on, each breed became involved, and it's continued, and it still is today. And of course, COVID stopped it in 2021. And then I decided it was time. I'd done it for 32 years to hand the reins over, and Declan Patton has taken it on. He's doing a wonderful job, and that's where it is today. So it's been going every year since pretty much 1990, and it's the place where everybody from Australia comes to. And this year, just the other day, it was tremendous. It's just unbelievable.
Oh, you had a marvelous show. And I'm going to back up. I don't want to get the wrath of Brownie for not recognizing him in the creation of this. I don't want to give Blackmore more credit than Brownie, Leslie, for sure. So when they listen to this, make sure Brownie knows that, I just missed that step of the process. But truly, I think about my first trips with Phil Malcolm and Graham Gillen and Brownie and Blackmore and what great promoters of the business you all were. I'm thrilled that Declan's taken over the reins for you, Brian. Tell us a little about the number of cattle that were there this year. I know there were tons of North American visitors there. Tell me what Dairy Week has grown into for a promotional activity for the industry.
Well, one thing it has done, it lifted the presentation of the show cattle in this country by bringing out North American fitters. And I think back to the very first Dairy Week in 1990, and Roger Turner and Brian Cascadden were kids, and they came down to Australia. I knew Roger quite well, and we got him to come down, and he worked with one string, and Brian Cascadden worked with another, and it went on. And I think of all the wonderful cowmen of today in your country that were just kids and come down to Australia, like Mark Reith came down fit back in the mid-90s, and then he ended up judging. And there's been so many more from all over the world, and that's been one thing that it's done. It's lifted the presentation dramatically. And I'm now one of the old guys, and I walk around at Dairy Week this year, and there's all these young, pale-skinned boys, and I guess they're from North America. I wouldn't know any of them now, and they do a great job. So, and of course, it's helped our young people. They get to know them, and they go overseas. And in his closing comments of judging the Holstein show this year, Barclay Phoenix said one thing that I'll never forget. He said, the dairy cow can be a passport around the world. And he was so right when he said, for young people, you get to know people from other ends of the world, and they do. our people here have got to know them over there and vice versa, and it becomes great friendships. And to me, that's the best part about pedigree cattle is the people you meet. They become great friendships, and it goes on for generations.
Absolutely. Brian, as you think through this, the influence that International Dairy Week has had helping people make money with their cattle and promote their cattle, and every breed, and it's substantial. I've done interviews on this podcast series with guys like Tom Morris that were instrumental with starting World Dairy Expo. And again, it's one group of people's vision, and hats off to you, Brian. I would tell our listeners it's a long flight to Australia, but it is worth every bit of it. They're the greatest hosts I've ever been to anywhere in the world. You'll enjoy every second that you're there. I encourage listeners to hop on a plane and think about making a business trip to Australia. So, Brian, as we round the bases here and wrap up this discussion, you're such a student of the breed, and we've talked about your knowledge of breed and cattle around the world. If you had to pick a few of your favorite cows or a few of your favorite cow families, who would they be?
Oh, there's two cows that I'll say are the greatest cows I've ever seen at their time. And I was lucky enough to watch Lowell Lindsay judge the Royal Winter Fair in 1985, and he gave Charity Champion Cow, and in his final remarks, he said, "I'll call her incredible perfection. How do you feel about that?" I'll never forget him saying it and the way he said it. And she was like, I'm a kid from Australia. I'd never seen a cow that good in my life. I couldn't believe it. And so I know cows have got better and better as time's gone on. But for that time, she was just unbelievable. And to see the Jersey cow, Duncan Bell, I'll never forget Bob Fitzsimmons making a champion at the Royal Winter Fair and Bert Stewart leading her. And I've never seen a cow come towards you any more perfect than when she was walking towards you. Just unbelievable cow. And so to me, those two cows stick in my mind. I know we've had wonderful cows since, but you ask about cow families, a family that really sticks in my mind for doing tremendous things from North America and then all over the world is the family that comes down from Stookie Black Rose. I mean, she was an amazing cow. I was lucky enough to see her a lot of times, but we see what Ladino Park Talent has done, being a grandson. I bought quite a few embryos off Hardy Shaw out of Talent's mother by Storm and got heifers, and they have bred on. Just the other day, the reserve champion cow at Dairy Week was a descendant of one of them. We've had champions at Dairy Week from those descendants. I don't, but the caught my eye cow that's winning at the moment in North America is off the same family. I get enthused what that family continues to do. Here in Australia, the Felicity family that come down from Frank Sorrigan's Achilles Felicity cow is still, she was champion at Melbourne Show 3 times in a row, all breeds in the late 60s and early 70s. And even this year, we're still seeing them do really well. It's amazing how it's continued. And the family from here that's gone around the world that excites me is Jed Bonney. To see what they've done in North America from here is pretty gratifying. And the Jersey families, you mentioned the Fernleaf, but the Illusions that Frankliff had, Tolgarth Illusion was champion cow at Melbourne Show in 1949, and we're seeing grand champions at Dairy Week in the last 10 years from the same family. It's continued on. So I think that's pretty neat. But there's marvellous cow families of all breeds, and I'm lucky enough to work with every breed here, and we've got some families that excite me and other breeds too that are pretty outstanding.
Great lesson on history of the cows and the breeding business. Brian, as you talk about those cows, just one quick side note for me, had a great message from Barry Monson from Australia this winter. When in my early days in my career, Brian, we loaded up 2 little Jersey calves on a plane and shipped them to Australia to Barry Monson and his partners. He told me that one calf that came down, I think Silver St. Janice was the pedigree behind her. He said the number 1 Jersey bull in Australia right now traces back through many lines there. And I know there's also been a branch of the Bell family that he and his partners, isn't that incredible to think about the influence you can have?
Yeah, look, amazing. Those families that you had something to do with back then for the Jersey breed have come out. Like we saw an evolution of the Jersey breed in this country, when we brought in the North American blood. And at the time when it came in, there were those that didn't like it. And it's progressed, and it's sell as many jerseys as I do Holsteins, and to see what the Jersey breed has done through use of genetics from around the world has just been amazing. And I go back to Jersey Island. They could not get semen from another country into their country until 2009 or 10. And for a man the age of John Lefevre to be wanting it to come in was incredible. And when they brought that North American semen to there, and I went and judged there in 2012 or 13, and I remember putting a 2-year-old of John's by action grand champion of the show. It was almost like hybrid vigor. What it did was incredible. And that's the biggest thing I've seen is the use of bloodlines from all over the world. We've had bulls go over to you. You've had bulls come to us, etc. That's what makes it so good. It's a global breeding ground nowadays, isn't it?
Yeah, and you're a catalyst for much of that because you have helped the breeders around the world understand that we need to cross pollination of all of our programs. I remember one of my favorite lines you and I used to use: the North American jerseys, we're going to vaccinate cows with milk. And we told a lot of people that about our bulls, and they truly did. That you had such a beautiful population of deep-bodied, strong, great-legged cows. We put that little bit of North American milk on them, and what a great group of cows you have in Australia. So, Brian, we thank you for having that vision. Nearly 3 decades that I've known you, Brian, the cow has changed a lot. You mentioned Charity and what a perfection cow she was. How is our cow different today? And what do you think the evolution of the great cow, what will she look like in 5 years compared to today?
Well, all I know is that we don't see the waste that we used to see. I go and do these large herd dispersals, and they'll have, in our country, large herds is, 300 plus, and they'll have 80 or 90 2-year-olds, and they're all good. I was skeptical about genomics when it came in because I'm old fashioned, but I think what it's done, it's got rid of the bad bulls. You don't have to wait 5 or 6 years for a bull to come through. And so we're seeing so much more consistency down the road. I think everybody's breeding good cows now, whereas when I was young, only some bred good cows. Now everybody is. And think of what, and we haven't had this discussion, I think of what you're doing with Showbox. I think of a couple of the greatest bulls that were ever used in Australia, a bull called Vale. He was a grandson of Northcroft Ella Elevation, who was a Royal Winter Fair and World Dairy Expo grand champion. I think of a bull called Ladino Park Talent. He was a grandson of Black Rose, who was a Royal Winter Fair grand champion. And I think of Showtime, which was Shawmar Perfect Star from Hardy Shaw, and he was one of the great bulls ever used in this country. He was out of Valiant Mars Perfection, who was an All-Canadian winner. Those cows can breed great bulls. Today, those great cows that are winning are so much better bred. They're by far better bulls, and they've got the sire stack now. And with genomics, I really think what you guys are going to do is get these great show cows that have got the great pedigrees, great genomics, and I can see you coming up with more Vales, more Talents, more Showtimes, and they won't be a rarity. They'll be common, and I look forward to it because those great cows with great pedigrees have such an impact, and they can have because they're outliers, aren't they? And they're outliers for various reasons because they're an incredible type. Who'd have ever believed we'd have so many cows as good as these cows that win at shows today? And the difference with show cows back in the Charity days, and she was ahead of her time, they weren't as milky. And now they are so incredibly milky and such good type. And I think it's exciting times.
Well, we couldn't agree more. Mike and I went into semi-retirement and still had enough passion to try to do this again in my career because of just what you're saying, Brian. The great cows aren't quite as much of a freak because they have a sire stack. Most of them are who they are because of a reason. And that's going to make breeding great bulls so much easier, I believe. And in my 30 years in the business, I go back to just what you're saying. The cow families, we've got more tools today because we got more great sires. We got more data to look at. And what Showbox is trying to do is use all the tools. We use genomics, we use cow family, we use performance. And I think that's what you're saying. So hats off to you for having the vision and changing through time. To wrap up, Brian, just kind of your parting thoughts on where the industry is headed. If you're a new person, a young person, whether you're in Australia or you're in Europe listening to this podcast or around North America, give them the last tidbit of Brian Leslie advice. Let me go back one time. When do you plan to be in North America again?
No, I haven't thought about it. I thought as I got older, wouldn't be as busy, but I sell a lot of beef sales these days too, and I seem to be flat out for time, but we'll get there one of these days, and it'd be great to see for sure. But I guess I never hold back on what I really think, and I see the cows just getting better and better all the time. udders are just unbelievable. The production you can get out of cows today is incredible. The fertility side of things is a big thing that everybody talks about. My clients do, all my large. See, here in Australia, we sell our cows to farmers. We don't have other people in the industry. It's point blank farmers. So the money they generate is generated out of a milk check. And, you know, we can sell our top end cows, but they've got to produce because they're going to someone that's made his money out of milk. It's as simple as that. I got to be honest, I don't like a lot of the kind of heifers that win at shows today. I think that there are too many judges want them way too fine and too skinny. That's not what you want in heifers. Certainly in our country, we've got to have heifers that are grass reared, so they've got to have some condition. And I don't like that in the industry, but I love the cows that I see that do so well. And the young cows are just amazing. And we see there at Dairy Week last week, like these 2-year-olds and senior twos, and you know, they're unbelievable. Like, they're just that good in the udder and good for, you know, all the way through. It's exciting times. And I really do think, you know, I quote my dad. He started using AI as an early user of AI in Australia back in the late 60s. And he often says, imagine if you had what you had today. Bulls are that much better. The genomics get rid of the bad bulls. And, you know, Dad's 84 and still takes a great interest and says, well, imagine if you had that. And I think it's fantastic. I think if you're breeding dairy cows, it's exciting times, and it's all forward from here on, I think.
Well, we sure appreciate that, Brian. I think our listeners around the world will appreciate your great stories, your great humility, and your great vision for what this business needs to look like. I think if we look at the evolution of the great cow, and we look at the history of our business, Brian Leslie will always be thought of as one of the iconic people in this entire business. And Brian, I thank you from the bottom of my heart, from Mike Duckett and myself, for Showbox Sires, for dairy business. They say on their logo, the future of dairy. And to have you be a friend and a mentor to me for the past 30 years, Brian, I've learned a lot from you. I won't always admit that, but I've learned a lot from you. I truly admire you and your ability. And for Tim Abbott to be able to interview Brian Leslie today and share this with our listeners around the world, it's been a true honor and pleasure. So thank you, Brian Leslie. Forward to working with you in the future.
Thank you, and good luck. And I'm looking forward to seeing what happens with your bulls, because I know you guys are smart and you'll buy the right ones and they'll do a great job. So good luck and thank you.